All right, and we'll go ahead and get started. And, again, welcome to the April CEDEN user group meeting. My name is Jarna Bennett, and I work in the Office of Information Management and Analysis at the State Water Board. Thank you for joining me today. Today we're going to talk about the start of the 2026 integrated report solicitation period and continue our discussion on passive samplers data entry. So with that, we'll get into it. I see that Tatiana and Jacob are here to, so if they want to add anything, they are welcome to, since they work in the program that is responsible for putting together the integrated report. But I did just want to make sure people were aware that although we encourage continuous data submittal to CEDEN, that officially we're in this solicitation period. And this year's regions are the North Coast, so Region 1, Lahontan, which is Region 6, and the Colorado River Basin region, Region 7, as well as part of Region 5. And then additionally, off-cycle regions can also assess upon request or as they feel the need to do. There is more information about submitting, making sure your data get assessed as part of the integrated report process here at the this link, the Surface Water Quality Assessment website. And I can go there really quickly. Basically, this website walks you through making sure you've provided your QAP, your Quality Assurance Project Plan, which is required for data to be one of the primary lines of evidence, as well as any data that isn't readily or isn't submitted through CEDEN, such as continuous data. You can submit that data through a portal on this website. And this website gives you directions for doing that. And importantly, the solicitation period ends October 21st of this year. Any questions? Okay, great. Well, if you're wanting to provide data for that, look over the website, or if you have any questions, and there's links, contact links on that Surface Water Quality Assessment page I was just showing, where you can contact me, and I can put you in touch with the right person. All right, so we'll move on then to the passive sampler data entry guidance or business rules. I think we're pretty close, but wanted to take a look at how some examples would be entered actually into our chemistry templates. And so I didn't have too many examples to use for this, so I just did what I could and thought we could talk about some of the things that I had already noticed when putting this together. So I just put in the 2 examples here. Can everybody see that okay now?
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, thank you. So let me get my other document out. So the station code should be straightforward, where we put out our sampler, and so I just used, one of them has the station code of another example in this workbook, and then I just made up the other one. The sample date is the date that we retrieved our sampler. The project code, is just a regular project code. We have event code is water quality. Protocol code, I just made something up, but you'd be using the protocol code that you're following. Sampling agency is straightforward. Sampling location, we don't specify this because it would be according to wherever you put your sampler. I said bank. Collection time, we again didn't, but we don't specify this in our guidance, but maybe we should. I think it would, I imagine that it would go along with the sample date of when I went to retrieve my samplers. Then the collection method is passive sampler. Sample type code, we talked about how the word integrated really makes sense in describing this type of sampling, and so we should use that. It does require us to change the current definition a little bit, so I still need to do that, but according to our guidance, using integrated is appropriate. In this example, I just used replicates of 1. For collection device name, looking at my first example, I used the example that we had in the write-up that includes the size and the pore size, and so hopefully that's reasonable. And then I think we'll finish this row, and then I'll go back to the highlighted cell. Oops. Yeah, collection depth. Again, I wasn't really, having not done this sampling, I wasn't really sure, but it seemed like a 0.5 meter was reasonable. But if people have other input, hopefully you'll speak up. Subsurface for lab collection comments is
Yeah, hi Jarma, this is Marco. So for integrated, typically we use -88 for collection depth because the water level can change over time. I believe that's the rule. I don't know if you want to apply it for passive samplers.
Yeah, that would for the depth you were saying -88.
Yeah, I believe it's -88.
Okay.
I think it's kind of the same for sediment samples because you're not always necessarily collecting it at the same depth. I mean, if you are, you can write that down, but if it varies over, different spots, it's -88.
Okay, so maybe I should add that to the document as well. Collection depth.
Melissa had a comment in the chat about that.
Sorry about that. Thank you. I didn't. Melissa's comment would reporting -88 get kicked out of the RELIP process for integrated report? RELIP is a tool that assessment staff use for analyzing all the data, and I don't for collection depth. It shouldn't get kicked out for that. Okay, thanks for bringing that up, though, or thinking about those things. We certainly don't want it to necessarily get kicked out without us realizing it. So I will add collection depth. Added in. Okay, and then moving along. The lab collection comments is where we specify to say how many days that the sampler was deployed. And then the lab batch would be whatever you get from the lab. And then the analysis date, that it was analyzed. We don't have a special rule for that. For the matrix name, we're using extract sample water as defined by our business rules. For the method, I used EPA 525.2 M and analyte whatever we're analyzing for, make that a little smaller. Fraction as specified. We want to use, or we're using dissolved. Okay, and so this is where I struggled a bit because I put the unit name, micrograms per sorbent, but then I realized for the MDL and RL, those aren't the same units, and typically in the CEDEN data entry, the result and the MDL and RL have the same units. So I was wondering what people thought about that. If that's a big concern or not how you would do it. Let me see, somebody's got their hand up. All right, Jenny?
Hi, so I jumped in a little late, but the line or row 29 is for the, like something I would deploy, right? The SPMD by the water calculator.
Yeah.
So the water calculator doesn't give you a microgram per sorbent. It gives you
right.
picogram per liter.
Point.
Yeah.
That was the whole point of having the water. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, so then we don't have a problem in that row about inconsistent units.
Right.
Pointing that out. Great.
Yeah. I mean, we would have to though, well then also, can you go back? The calculator was under the method name.
Yeah, can you hold comments on that row? I was gonna try to finish up this first row and then go more detailed into the second row with the SPMD. So
okay, because I had some comments about the MDL and the reporting limit, but it would go back to that. So I'll wait. But I know likely they can convert the MDL into a microgram per sorbent because I don't know. It's still right when you're, I guess it would depend on how, if the replicate, I think that the end user can think about it more because if you only have one sorbent deployed, then the reporting limit is still going to be that same number. But if they analyze more than one sorbent together, then the reporting limit would increase by how many sorbents were deployed. Right, because you take all your sorbents and then you turn them into a liquid. And then that liquid is analyzed with a certain reporting limit. So if you only have one sorbent, you're only analyzing one sorbent. But if you are putting more than one sorbent into that one volume to analyze, then basically if you're reducing your unit name to microgram per sorbent, then your reporting limit is a factor of how many sorbents were deployed. If this is a unit, it's just like a mass Yeah.
So you're doing the same thing to your MDL and your RL as you're doing to your result. So it actually isn't inconsistent units, it sounds like.
Well, you would have to, okay, let's say, sorry, I put food in my mouth. I thought we were done.
That's okay.
Okay, let's say you deployed 2 sorbents and your diazinon concentration was 10. You would be reporting here 5 because it's microgram per sorbent.
Right.
Okay, so when you measured 10, your reporting limit was actually like 5 for 2 sorbents. But since you're reporting for 1 sorbent, then your reporting limit would actually just be 2.5 per sorbent. So I would keep these numbers the same, but the end user wouldn't know, like somewhere, right? You're going to say how many sorbents were deployed or no?
No, we don't actually have a place for that because we expect you to
Reduce the data before you enter it.
Yeah.
Okay.
But that's how we have it set up now. But let's see, we should at least add a note that the RL.
Well, maybe someone else who actually uses these type of samplers, because I use the SPMDs, might have something to say about how they understand the data in terms of their detection limits.
Anybody else? There were hands up before. Tiffany?
Hi. Yeah. So the MDL, like, so you actually have to have a method developed for the passive samplers. Like, you can't run them. I mean, theoretically, you could run them on other methods, but there should be an MDL that's established for the method that you are running the passive sampler on. And depending on whether or not, like if you deploy 2 samplers at a time, those would be 2 discrete samples that have the same MDL. You have the option, you would never add them together after the fact, but you could pull them together at the, like, let's say you put 250 milligrams of sorbent in each sampler. Before analysis, you could pool that into 500 milligrams, and it would go through a method with an equivalent, with the same method detection limit. Like the method doesn't change, but sort of the amount you're extracting off of changes. But that's been my understanding on how I've received results. But like the MDL is just whatever the method actually is, the method that's been established for that sorbent, and it doesn't change based on how many samples you're submitting or whether or not you're pooling the samples ahead of time.
But I think the issue is that the MDL units.
Yeah,
right?
the MDL units are nanograms per gram.
Yeah.
The MDL unit, well, they're the units of, yeah, they end up in the same units as the sampler. It's not in like micrograms per liter. There's a conversion factor that can go on, and I have an example method I can pull up. That's from, I don't think, I don't think is John here on the call? I don't think he is. John Strum. No, let me see if I can let me pull up the method really quick. It is, because we have a grab sample method and a passive sample method that are on the same method, and the detection limits are, I think, both given separately. This might take me a second to pull this up.
Yeah, sorry for putting you on the spot. Thank you.
No worries. It's probably going to be somewhere like a million emails. Let's see. If I can find it, I can even share it.
I could give you a minute and we can just highlight this section and come back to it. So
I think that's a good idea. Yeah. I'll raise my hand again when I find it.
Okay, great. And then moving on to QA code would be normal, and compliance code I didn't record. Dilution factor of 1, preservation, talked about that, and there are different options for those. I just used the field filtered with the scenario that I didn't do any preconditioning. Preservation. Oh yeah, date. I used the date of retrieval as well. I think that should actually have a time on there too. And then for the digest extract method, this Tiffany will help us out there with the method that she has, but it sounded like from the method name and that was used that I wrote it down here, or I copied it in our agenda.
Do I have the option to share screen? Can I
You should, yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah, go for it.
Because I have the method.
Great.
I think it's window. This one. Can everybody see that?
I can, yes.
Yeah, so there's an on column and in sample, and then there's a conversion to what that MDL looks like at different like sorbent masses. And so this should be given on whatever method that you're using to analyze your sample. And it's usually like this says PPT, but it's really nanograms. It's nanograms per gram equivalent of PPT. Yeah.
So for different analytes.
Yeah.
You have, what does the M plus H mean?
The M, this is the adduct that so this is in positive mode and this is in negative mode. This is the adduct, this is how it was basically how it was determined on the mass spec. It's not really, this is sort of more relevant to like a chemist who would be looking at this who wanted that, but it's not necessarily something that like I think it's been adducted with this and it's gone through in positive mode, I think is the explanation that was given to me through the machine. And then so that's the different analytes are just extracted differently, and the machine has to be in a different mode to see them. And then there's fractions sometimes that go through both modes, and then those get added together and they have their own MDL. So for every analyte, there should be a corresponding MDL that should be reported with it.
So the prime HLB.
These are two different types of sorbent, prime HLB and HLB bulk. Because it was tested like our lab often uses prime HLB for like extractions of grab samples because they find the results that come out a little bit better. But the company who makes this HLB, which is like Oasis HLB, is normally what's used in like a passive sampler. They don't sell it in bulk. It's like this proprietary like version of prime. You can only buy it in preloaded cartridges. And the only kind they'll sell you in bulk is their original Oasis HLB. And so the lab tested what it looked like on both. Because I think they didn't realize it didn't come in bulk. Like I was buying this one and they were using this one in the lab. And so they ended up validating the method on both, but we're only ever really going to use this one over here. Yeah.
And then what did you say the difference with the on column and the in sample?
This is like basically what's being like on column is like what's coming out of the machine, but is not really, this is not relevant to anybody like an end user. This is sort of like these two columns here are basically like what the lab sees, and then the lab has to like convert into this. So yeah, I mean, I like these three columns here are sort of like for lab use, and then these columns here are for end user use.
Did you have a question?
Oh, I was just gonna say. So it sounds like with the prime HLB, like if it's preloaded, then 500 milligrams is sort of like that's the size. But then I'm trying to think of like with these other applications where it's like discs or whatever, if that's a situation where it's like the lab would have an MDL that they would need to like multiply by the mass of sorbent analyzed, or how that would work.
Yeah, so like
okay.
I actually provide the lab. I provide like sort of nominal 200. It ends up being like 200 because I build these samplers myself and I load them with HLB bulk, like just regular Oasis HLB. And so they actually use the extracted weight to calculate the exact amount in the sample. So they like weigh my sample afterwards and give that to me. The 500, like you would never put this in a sampler. Like this isn't even preload. This is in like a cartridge that they use in a lab for extraction. Like it was sort of a mistake that this got analyzed this way, because like you'd have to buy a 500 milligram cartridge and you'd have to tear it apart and put it into a sampler. Like there's no way to actually like get a sampler pre-made with prime HLB. The company does not allow it. They don't allow sale of like this product without being preloaded into extraction cartridges, which is basically like a syringe with some Fritz inside of it that they run the solvent inside of. So yeah, you basically have to tell, like when you're developing a method for this, like, so this one was validated on 100 milligrams, and like I ended up telling the lab that I want to be submitting 200 because we get slightly better results with increased mass. And so the lab actually has to revalidate all of these compounds at 200 milligrams to see what the correct MDL is for that. You can like extrapolate it if you want to, like doing sort of like a mini validation type thing. But for like full validation, they sort of have to repeat the validation study on an increased mass. So it's basically like you have to tell the lab what mass you want to use ahead of time to get an appropriate MDL when they're developing the method. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. It sounds like at the very least, it might require like a little bit of communication, but
for sure,
you definitely can get that information of MDL and RL in milligrams.
Absolutely, the lab should be able to provide it for whatever mass that you have like deployed or given them. Yeah. Okay. But it does require sort of upfront communication to know that like you're doing what the method is doing, or the method is doing what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Should I still leave this up, or do you guys want me to?
Let me see. Jenny, do you have a new question, or was your hand up from before?
Oh, I guess I never took my hand down. Okay. Sorry.
All right. No, I think that's good, Tiffany. Thank you very much for sharing it.
Sure.
May take some more thinking about.
Yeah.
So that's a method that the lab that John works out developed and uses for.
Yeah. That's from the CDFA, and I also said samples to Tom Young's lab at UC Davis, and they've given me sample results back, but like they have an MDL for like the grab sample, and I don't think I looked at. Yeah, and they have a limit of detection in micrograms per gram, and I can also sort of show what that, because it's like they don't have like, obviously it's not like a regulatory thing, so they don't have an official like method, but this is like what the data they send back to me looks like. So it's basically like, oh, this should be LOQ. But they give me an LOQ and an LOD in micrograms per gram, and then these are the sample numbers, and then this is the result. And so they've calculated this number based on the amount of sorbent I've given them. And I can ask them how they sort of develop that number, because I think it's very similar. Like this is the grab sample results. Oh yeah, this is the reverse. So it's similar, like you can see that it's like, it's higher, obviously. It's a little bit higher, well, because it's in micrograms per gram. But yeah, like the lab is able to actually give me a number for this to compare to this number.
Okay. So again, based on a method or at least a procedure developed
Correct.
specifically for the passive samplers.
Yeah. Because it's really sort of like the mass of what's being extracted that matters, because like a passive sample extraction is the same as a solid phase, like an SPE extraction of a grab sample, right? Because you're just taking that SPE material and you're putting it in the field instead of having it in a preloaded cartridge in the lab that the water is pushed over. And so like the preloaded cartridge like always has the same mass, right? So that's sort of, it's always a predetermined thing. So I think theoretically, like if you provided the same mass as a preloaded cartridge that was the same sorbent and everything, they basically remake the cartridge and extract over that in a very similar way. And so you could theoretically use another method, and then the method detection limits would be the same as what were determined for that method. Yeah.
Then it sounds like for our entry here, the MDL and RL would be method, according to the method, which is then specific to the amount of sorbent being used.
Yeah, or something like that. Like it would be a number that was given to you by the lab for that specific analysis. Yeah.
And you said that when you were using 200 whatever milligrams or whatever, it ended up being a different MDL.
Yeah, I think the lab is redoing it, but I think the MDL, I mean, it's roughly the same, but it's, because I think what happens is sometimes some labs like they do it and they do sort of a mini validation study, and then there's like sort of a common number. Like some of them might be a little bit lower, but they'll sort of just bump it up so that it's an equivalent number across, all of the masses. Like it's always 0.005 or something like that. So that might be the case, but like a lab may request, like if you're going to be sending in a different amount of sorbent, like they might have to redo part of their method to confirm that it's working properly. Yeah.
Jenny?
Yeah, Tiffany, I'm interested because the data you showed us is mass per mass, but the data that everyone's kind of decided to go into CEDEN is mass per sorbent. So you're going to have to reduce your data or change your data?
No, it's well, I'm not sure. I always get data reported back in mass per mass, and so the bottom mass and the mass per mass is mass of sorbent.
So you already have it calculated for you?
Yeah, or I
Okay.
calculate it myself by knowing how much, but like, yeah, so I mean, I don't know, from my perspective, like if I were to be entering data in the database, you want to be entering in mass per mass. And if you're not entering in mass per mass, you need to have a column of how much mass, like what your sorbent number is. I guess I'm not really even sure. I've missed the past couple meetings, and so I'm not necessarily sure what the mass per sorbent is. Yeah.
I think it was like, you know, if you deployed one disk, or, you know, in your case, it sounds like, you know, 100 gram, I don't know, your passive sampler is like a column. Yeah.
Yeah. We change, it's a disk, but it's like we change how much we put in the disk, and we change the size of the disk. Because none of it's really like, there's no standard like disk size, there's no standard surface area exposure, there's no standard shape. Like you could do square ones, you could do round ones, you could do big ones, small ones. You have a whole bunch of different options. And so yeah, it should always be, I mean, the lab is always going to give you grams per gram, because that's what they read, and then that's what you know the mass, or they're going to give you micrograms per something, and to get that number you have to divide by the amount of mass you deployed, and then it's in micrograms per gram, and then everything's on the same scale once it's in micrograms per gram. Like your units are consistent, it's always mass per mass. So if you're trying to compare data, you always want to be comparing in mass per mass.
So Jenny, when you for the SPMDs, what do you get?
We get total mass per ampule, you know, so per extract. And then we convert that to mass per SPMD.
Right. Because you guys don't have a gram unit on that. It's just, or a mass unit, because it's just a membrane, right? So
there is something, but it's in the water calculator.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically it goes, you know, this membrane goes somewhere, and then they extract it into about 2 milliliters. But the lab that tests for the different constituents measures what the actual volume is. So we just get total volume, total mass of the analyte for the entire extraction.
Yeah. I think like sort of the underlying problem here is that like while they're both passive samplers, they're totally different type of samplers. You know, there's like there's sorbent filled samplers, and then there's membrane samplers, which there's really no way to like compare those sort of like concentrations. Like they're very different values, right?
Well, that's why it gets converted into an aqueous concentration.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, given that statement, do you think it's right? Currently, our guidance, you know, looks like, let me get it over here. And for all passive samplers, do the entry of the extracted material from the sorbent like this, and then if you're using an SPMD that has this you know, online calculator that, you know, with published versions, so that people are more comfortable with kind of a standardized numbers, you know, put in the aqueous concentration according to that calculator. But because of these different, it sounds like significant differences in the types of passive samplers, should we be getting more refined and saying this if your sampler is really more just a membrane, if your sampler is really just a membrane, then there's a chunk of, then there's these rules. And if your sampler has massive sorbent, then there's these rules that, there's going to be a lot of overlap, but you'd be better in helping people know what to put.
Yeah, I mean, I think something like that sort of has to happen because the sorbent-based ones are always going to be in mass per mass, sort of where you're going to end up with it. And it sounds like, I don't work with the SPMDs at all, but it sounds like you're always going to end up with a aqueous concentration, like a milligrams per liter or, micrograms per liter or something like that. But like,
Right.
It's debatable how that number is determined. Is that
No,
what
I don't think so, but that's because I work with them, I guess. Because you have the calculator, so it has all the KOWs and
Gotcha.
assumptions of the membrane and stuff.
But you always end up with an aqueous phase. So it sort of sounds like, could be, like you could have, if you're putting them in the same place, like you could have a, sort of concentration column, but you'd have to have a units column where you just specify if it's in, micrograms per liter or micrograms per gram, and then a column for sampler type, which is like SPMD. And if you pick SPMD, like the only thing it lets you enter is an aqueous concentration. And if you pick, like sorbent-based sampler, the only thing it lets you pick is some type of mass per mass unit. I guess I'm just thinking about that from like database entry side of.
Yeah, we won't have the sophistication to limit data entry according to what you enter, but we can at least outline that in our rules.
Specify it, yeah.
Yeah. So is it pretty much SP? I mean, and that's kind of where we have it.
That's what I thought, that we had these two different type of entries that you were showing us in the Excel file. Yeah.
And so is it really SPMDs and then everything else like could be we should just not, when we're doing the let me go back to my Excel, the this results of the sorbent analysis, that we should not be considering SPMDs there and only consider them when we do the aqueous concentration entry, and that then all the other types would fall in under row 28.
Right. Yeah, because when we give data to the state, we just, we tell, when we enter the data, we state if it's a grab, a 24-hour composite, or a SPMD. That's all, micrograms per liter.
Yeah, and then on the sorbent side, like you'd also want to be able to specify like what type of sorbent you used, because there's a whole bunch of different options on that front as well, right? And I think that's probably in there somewhere.
I thought it was.
Do you have this
matrix name? Is that what
it's a
right.
collection device name that tries to stuff a bunch of stuff in there. And so that we kind of have and so we had kind of gotten to thinking that the most readily available number was this mass per sorbent, but it sounds, I mean, you said this.
Well, even like with the chem
meetings.
catchers, they should be telling you like how, I think there's a standard mass in a chem catcher, like depending on which one you purchase. And that's where you'd get that like mass per mass number. And that's what the lab should be reporting. Like the lab should be reporting a mass per mass. They might not if you don't like request it. I think someone has their hand up.
I was just gonna say, like, is this just switching it from mass per sorbent to mass per mass sorbent?
Yeah.
Okay. I just making sure I'm understanding.
Yeah. Because it's like, instead of saying like mass, because really it's like mass, I think when you guys are saying mass per sorbent, it sounds like it's saying like mass per disc or something.
That
Like
was
massive
that was the
analyte per
original
disc.
intention.
But like the disc can have, a variety of sorbents, and it can have a variety of masses inside of it. So it really should be mass of analyte per mass of sorbent. And then you have to specify how much mass was in there. So if you wanted to calculate, like how much was in the specific disc, you would multiply by the mass that's in the disc. But if you wanted to compare across different types of, like different samples, like there's no way to compare like mass per disc, large and mass per disc small. Like that's not like if you wanted to compare them on the same playing field, you'd be doing mass per mass of sorbent. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I guess I had kind of gotten to the point of thinking that the math comparing with the different variabilities was that comparison valuable.
Yeah, I think the comparison, like if you're doing any type of comparison, it has to be on a mass per mass basis. Yeah. And that's what you do like when you want to compare like over time, like at a same site or something. Like let's say at one site you deployed 500 milligrams of sorbent the first time, and then the second time you went back, you put in something that was 250. If you wanted to see how that, like, let's say you were looking for like atrazine or something, if you wanted to see how the concentration of atrazine changed over time at that site, you would want to look for, you would want to compare mass per mass, because you deployed two different masses. So you started out with 500, then you deployed 250, and like mass per disc might not tell you anything because your second disc was smaller. So if you looked at mass per mass, you'd be able to see those two numbers like as a time series. And you'd get a standard basis of comparison because the units are the same.
I think the idea, I mean, we've talked about this several times over the last 6 months, and I think the idea was we went with just sorbent because not every sorbent is in a mass, like in a gram scale. Some of them are in volumes because there's a liquid sorbent. And I think the idea was if it was micrograms per sorbent, then it's up to the user, it's up to the information like in the collection device to know that it's standardized across whatever that collection device or sorbent was. I think that's why because we were talking about micrograms per gram sorbent, and I think the idea was we needed to be more generic because the sorbents vary, and the idea was it's up to the lab to report it correctly.
But like, how would a user using the database like know the universe of sampling devices? I think that's the thing that's like someone who's not doing it, right? Someone who just wants to use the data, like they go in and they see, something per disc or whatever, then they got to go do research about like what's in a disc, when really
what
it should
people
sort of be
talked about
split
is
by sampler type.
Well, what people talked about is each disc is different, and so you almost have to do your analysis based on the collection device and what was used.
Yeah, but if it's the same type of sorbent, like you can at least do a comparison if it's in standard unit. But like if you have a liquid sorbent, you're not going to be doing micrograms per gram. You're just going to be like micrograms per liter or something like, right? It's going to be some sort of aqueous concentration.
Right. So when the unit is micrograms per sorbent, then you would use the collection device name to note what type of sorbent was used, and you would know not to compare, a liquid versus a non-liquid item.
So I guess do we need to break it up on to those types of differences, the entry specification? So if you're using a liquid sorbent, that we would specify that differently.
Because I think yes, because I think that like there's no way to compare like a liquid sorbent to a solid sorbent. Like if you're trying to compare like actual concentration, like you can't compare whatever you get off of a liquid sorbent. Like you can't say, okay, well I got like, 5 micrograms per liter off this liquid sorbent and 10 micrograms per gram off of this other sorbent. Like there's really no way to like compare those numbers like quantitatively. So
what would be you just said the units for something that had a liquid sorbent would be like a mass per volume.
I assume it would be. I have not worked with liquid sorbents.
Has anybody like worked with liquid sorbents? Yeah, I mean, if that's like, I knew there were different examples that made it seem like, it would be hard to do, more difficult to do the mass per mass. And so, as Marco was saying, it seemed most universal to do mass per sorbent. But if we could carve out the ones that are so different, like the liquid sorbents, and just say, for these ones, your unit is going to be this, and then it would highlight that they're not comparable as well. But it's a hard unit as well, because we certainly don't want to get that confused with like your actual water body concentration. Adam.
Yeah, I guess I thought part of the reason that we were doing mass per sorbent was the idea that we were trying to discourage comparison, basically, and that the idea was, other than the SPMDs, like these concentrations, whether you can get some sense of relative abundance as far as like, total mass on a disc or whatever, but like that the idea was we wanted to make it hard because otherwise people would be comparing things they shouldn't compare. But maybe I was misunderstanding sort of the original intention of why we were doing things the way we were doing it. It was just on like the original, or not the original.
Yeah, I can really see how that would happen of like people miscomparing, but I feel like, I don't know, is the risk not as high, equally as high when they see like mass per sorbent? Then they're just going to be like, okay, like they're going to look at collection device name. When I think about like a user, like I have people, like I build databases and people look at them and they look at collection device name. They're like, oh yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff there. I don't really want to look at that. And then they could just compare the, sort of the easy numbers. And so, yeah, there's definitely this like really fine line here between like setting up the database such that people don't make inappropriate comparisons of numbers, but also, I mean, right, you build the database so that, you try to like, you try to like, preempt your users' missteps in some way.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know that there's a really good solution for this.
Yeah. But Tiffany, you get your results in mass per mass, so that's so it's easier. And if you were to be filling out our data templates, it would be easy for you to just say, oh, that what my lab sheet says this, I'm going to put that in.
Yeah.
But I don't know if does anybody else have experience with getting lab results back, and what units those come in? We talked about Jenny, but for the SPMDs, we have that kind of that pathway solved, so it doesn't matter as much. Lisa.
Yeah, just coming from the lab side, typically when we analyze a solid, it's going to come off as some kind of a like micrograms per kilogram. Liquids would come off as micrograms per liter. That's because in order to do the extraction, we have to have a weight or volume of the sample that we're extracting to start with. Then if the client requests that we report it in something like this microgram per sorbent, what we do is we actually take the entire weight of the sorbent and calculate whatever portion of that weight we extracted to get a weight per sorbent.
Okay, so that they would request that specifically.
They'd have to
that
specifically request that, but by default, the laboratory is probably going to give you either a mass per mass or mass per volume.
Yeah, so like in my data, I'd have to request that the lab provide to me like what the final weight was, or assume that it's 200, because sometimes it ends up being like 215 or 198 or something. So I'd have to request that the lab either give me that number or pick a number and then multiply it by the number they gave me. And that would give me the mass per sorbent or mass per disc or whatever. I think it's also a little bit confusing to me to have it as mass per sorbent, because that makes it sound like it's sorbent mass, whereas really it's mass per sampler. I think is what we're talking about, like the difference.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I think tried to clarify this, but I provided examples of these pictures that like.
But like
maybe
we
it's
call these
incorrect,
samplers, right?
Right,
So
the
like,
whole thing is sampler, so you have
well, no, like
four
each
discs, no?
disc is a sampler.
Oh, okay. See, there's mine.
Yeah. And then it's like the whole thing is like there's like we call them sampling discs or sampler, and then the whole thing is either passive sampling device or sampler, but really each one of those things is a sampler. It's sort of one of those things where you like say sheep and sheep for
yeah, for one and many.
Yeah, for one and many is sort of the same word. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we're at the end of our time, and I feel that I've gone backwards, but it's not necessarily bad. But we're still we had gotten to previously using the mass per sorbent, or we will need to maybe look back at the language that I actually had in the document to make sure that we're using those terms consistently. But for two reasons: ease of the provider, and to try to kind of accepting that they weren't results weren't too comparable, and so we didn't want people to compare them incorrectly. I am but I'm kind of swayed to go look at that again and go more the route that Tiffany was saying, if their lab is going to be reporting it in mass per mass of sorbent anyway. So we have to wrap up now, but if you have a direction that you think we should be going, please feel free to email me, and we'll go from there. So thanks again for the great conversation. I wish I had more experience actually using these devices. It would definitely be easier, but I appreciate those perspectives of people who have. So have a great day.
If like more people had example data to send in, like if we could all just like get a bunch of example data and then see how it would like fit together.
Yeah, if you have example data, send it my way. Thanks. That's a great idea. All right, bye.